I'm David Adler, president of the Alturas Institute. I'm a constitutional scholar, and today I'm going to be reacting to the 2020 vice presidential debate.
Good evening. From the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, welcome to the first and only vice presidential debate of 2020. Please welcome California Senator Kamala Harris and Vice President Mike Pence.
This is a historic moment for the United States. Kamala Harris is the first black woman ever nominated to the post of vice president for a major party. She's here running against Mike Pence, and the two should produce, I think, a very lively debate. Pence is more subdued than Donald Trump, for sure. Kamala Harris is a very bright former prosecutor whom we all expect will be at the top of her game and will be ready to pounce on Mike Pence's misstatements and errors of fact.
The American people have witnessed what is the greatest failure of any presidential administration in the history of our country. Can you imagine if you knew on January 28th, as opposed to March 13th, what they knew, what you might have done to prepare? They knew and they covered it up. The president said it was a hoax. They minimized the seriousness of it. The president said, you're on one side of his ledger if you wear a mask, you're on the other side of his ledger if you don't.
That is a very powerful opening by Kamala Harris to accuse the administration of a colossal failure and also to accuse the administration of covering up this pandemic, which has cost 210,000 American lives and afflicted 7.5 million people. And so she is right in bringing right to the audience this very powerful statement of what will be undoubtedly her foundation point throughout this debate.
From the very first day, President Donald Trump has put the health of America first. Before, there were more than 5 cases in the United States, all people who had returned from China. President Donald Trump did what
the statement by Vice President Pence that from the beginning Donald Trump has held the health interests of Americans uppermost in mind is completely false. We now know from the interviews that Bob Woodward did with Donald Trump that he intentionally downplayed the lethality of the virus. So from the beginning, Mike Pence is dissembling before the many millions of Americans who are watching this debate.
Was he suspended all travel from China, the second largest economy in the world.
That's a misleading statement. President Trump did not suspend all flights from China. He had many, many exceptions, and in fact, the suspension looked like Swiss cheese. In fact, if he had been serious, he would have taken stronger steps. But we also know that many cases of COVID came from Europe. So this represents another misleading effort by the Trump-Pence ticket to blame everything on China.
Joe Biden opposed that decision. He said it was xenophobic and hysterical. But I can tell you, having led the White House Coronavirus Task Force, that decision alone by President Trump bought us invaluable time to stand up.
It's very interesting that Vice President Pence would say immediately, would own up to the fact that he was the head of the Coronavirus Task Force, which has proven to be an utter failure given the fact that 7.5 million Americans have contracted the virus and we've suffered 210,000 American deaths. Most politicians would want to run from that number, but it's his strategy to identify himself as the head of that task force and all the while maintaining that the administration has done everything that it possibly could.
I mean, quite frankly, when I look at their plan that talks about advancing testing, creating new PPE, developing a vaccine, it looks a little bit like plagiarism.
Whatever the vice president is claiming the administration has done, clearly it hasn't worked.
But when you say what the American people have done over these last 8 months hasn't worked, that's a great disservice to the sacrifices the American people have made.
Vice President Pence has just deliberately distorted what Kamala Harris said. She was talking about the failures of the administration. Vice President Pence immediately resorts to the demagogue's path, which is to distort what his opponent has said. I don't think that Americans will fall for such a transparent effort to mislead the viewers as to what Kamala Harris did in fact say.
When Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx and our medical experts came to us in the second week of March, they said if the president didn't take the unprecedented step of shutting down roughly half of the American economy, that we could lose 2.2 million Americans.
When Vice President Pence says that Donald Trump deserves credit for shutting down the economy, of course, that's absurd. That's untrue. America's governors took the steps in their own respective states to shut down the economy in varying degrees. President Trump was uninterested in shutting down the economy. He was engaged in a constant push to keep the economy open. It was, viewers will recall, his interest in packing the pews in America's churches for Easter Sunday, which would have been a recipe for disaster.
They also said to us if we did everything right, Susan, we could still lose more than 200,000 Americans.
President Pence, you were in the front row in a Rose Garden event 11 days ago at what seems to have been a super spreader event for senior administration and congressional officials. No social distancing, few masks, and now a cluster of coronavirus cases among those who were there. How can you expect Americans to follow the administration's safety guidelines to protect themselves from COVID when you at the White House have not been doing so?
Well, the American people have demonstrated over the last 8 months that when given the facts, they're willing to put the health of their families and their neighbors and people they don't even know first.
Well, that's a whopper.
In the American people and their ability to take that information and put it into practice. At that, if I may say, that Rose Garden event, there's been a great deal of speculation about it. My wife Karen and I were there and honored to be there. Many of the people who were at that event, Susan, actually were tested for coronavirus, and it was an outdoor event, which all of our scientists regularly and routinely advise. The difference here is President Trump and I trust the American people to make choices.
That's another whopper. If President Trump trusted the American people, he would have entrusted them with the facts, with evidence and true statements about the status and the lethality of the virus. The very fact that President Trump acknowledged to Bob Woodward that he was deliberately downplaying the lethality of the virus, deliberately misleading the American people, speaks volumes for the fact that he did not want to trust the American people with the facts.
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris consistently talk about mandates, and not just mandates with the coronavirus, but a government takeover of health care,
Thank you,
the Green New Deal, all government control. We're about freedom and respecting the freedom of the American people.
Another whopper. Joe Biden has never said he favors government control of everything. He's never even claimed that he supports the Green New Deal. And so Pence has already, I think, on several occasions indicated that his intention here is to mislead viewers about the approach and strategy of the Biden campaign.
Let's talk about respecting the American people. You respect the American people when you tell them the truth. You respect the American people when you have the courage to be a leader speaking of those things that you may not want people to hear, but they need to hear so they can protect themselves. It is asking too much of the people.
Susan, we talk about
it is asking too much of the people that they would not be equipped with the information they need to help themselves to protect their parents and their children.
Pence is imitating Donald Trump in his practice of speaking over Kamala Harris, interrupting her on several occasions.
The Trump administration approves a vaccine before or after the election. Should Americans take it, and would you take it?
If the public health professionals, if Dr. Fauci, if the doctors tell us that we should take it, I'll be the first in line to take it, absolutely. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
That was a pretty strong statement by Kamala Harris, reflective of her trust in the scientific community with respect to the standards that would be employed in the production of the virus, but also indicating that, in fact, she would not trust Donald Trump's representation of the relative safety of the virus. That speaks volumes for her distrust of Donald Trump.
Pence, have you had a conversation or reached an agreement with President Trump about safeguards or procedures when it comes to the issue of presidential disability? And if not, do you think you should?
Well, Susan, thank you, although I would like to go back.
I think we need to move on to the issue
Well, thank you, but I would like to go back because the reality is that we're going to have a vaccine, Senator, in record time, in unheard of time, in less than a year. We have 5 companies in phase 3 clinical trials, and we're right now producing tens of millions of doses. So the fact that you continue to undermine public confidence in a vaccine, if the vaccine emerges during the Trump administration, I think is unconscionable. And Senator, I just ask you, stop playing politics with people's lives.
When she expressed her distrust in a statement, any statement by Donald Trump as to the satisfactory nature of the virus, Vice President Pence then tried to say that she's deliberately undermining the scientific community and playing politics with the scientific community, which she's decidedly not doing. So Pence is on an interesting path here tonight to mislead viewers.
President Trump nor Vice President Biden has released a sort of detailed health information that had become the modern norm until the 2016 election. Is this information voters deserve to know?
The care the president received at Walter Reed Hospital, the White House doctors, was exceptional. And the transparency that they practiced all along the way will continue. The American people have a right to know about the health and well-being of their president, and will continue to do that. But I'm just extremely grateful and was more than a little moved by the broad and bipartisan support. And Senator, I want to thank you and Joe Biden for your expressions of genuine concern. And I also want to congratulate you, as I did on that phone call, on the historic nature of your nomination.
Thank you. Joe Biden has been so incredibly transparent, and certainly by contrast, the president has not, both in terms of health records, but also let's look at taxes. We now know, because of great investigative journalism, that Donald Trump paid $750 in taxes. When I first heard about it, I literally said, "You mean $750,000? And it was like, no, $750. Donald Trump owes and is in debt for $400 million. And it'd be really good to know who the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, owes money to.
Look, I respect the fact that Joe Biden spent 47 years in public life. I respect your public service as well.
Thank you.
But the American people have a president who's a businessman, he's a job creator, who's paid tens of millions of dollars in taxes, payroll taxes, property taxes. He's created tens of thousands of American jobs. And the president said those public reports are not accurate. And the president's also released literally stacks of financial disclosures.
Vice President Pence is having a difficult time responding to the staggering numbers presented by Kamala Harris, and he evades the central question of the amount of money that Donald Trump paid in income taxes by talking about other kinds of taxes. It's clearly a subject that Pence does not want to discuss, and it's a bread and butter issue for the American people. Most Americans will complain about the amount of taxes they pay, and when they hear that President Trump has paid only $750, they will believe that he's not playing fair and square.
Senator Harris, the Biden-Harris campaign has proposed new programs to boost the economy, and you would pay for that new spending by raising $4 trillion in taxes on wealthy individuals and corporations. Some economists warn that could curb entrepreneurial ventures that fuel growth and create jobs. Would raising taxes put the recovery at risk?
Joe Biden believes you measure the health and the strength of America's economy based on the health and the strength of the American worker and the American family. On the other hand, you have Donald Trump, who measures the strength of the economy based on how rich people are doing, which is why he passed a tax bill benefiting the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America, leading to a $2 trillion deficit that the American people are going to have to pay for.
President Trump cut taxes across the board. Despite what Senator Harris says, the average American family of four had $2,000 in savings in taxes. The average household income for a family of four increased by $4,000 following President Trump's tax cuts. But America, you just heard Senator Harris tell you, on day one, Joe Biden's going to raise your taxes. It's really remarkable to think, Susan.
It's pretty amazing that Wall Street bankers are supporting Joe Biden because they support his view that taxes have to be raised and that the $2 trillion tax cut enacted by President Trump to favor the top 1% and wealthy banks added immeasurably to our national debt.
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris want to raise taxes. They want to bury our economy under a $2 trillion Green New Deal, which you were one of the original co-sponsors of in the United States Senate. They want to abolish fossil fuels and ban.
There's another whopper. Joe Biden has not embraced the Green Deal, the new Green Deal. He is, in fact, very clearly explained to the public where he stands on some of the measures proposed by the Green New Deal, but he's not embracing it hook, line, and sinker. Pence seems to think that that is an argument to be used against Biden to pull votes away from the former vice president. More Americans are supportive of measures that will do exactly that to ensure clean air, clean water, and the future of our planet.
Joe Biden has been very clear. He will not raise taxes on anybody who makes less than $400,000 a year.
He said he's going to repeal the Trump tax cuts.
Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking.
Well, wait.
I'm speaking.
That's precisely the right kind of response to make to Vice President Pence, and no doubt he's engaged in the effort to speak over her, to interrupt her, to condescend to her as part of a strategy to appeal to certain male voters whom they think they can win support from by demonstrating that a woman on stage is inferior to the man on stage. And Kamala Harris is having nothing to do with that. I think women across America probably recognize that moment when so many men speak over women.
And President Trump and I have a plan to improve health care and to protect pre-existing conditions for every American. Senator Harris, you're entitled to your own opinion.
The very fact that they have yet to present a plan indicates very clearly they don't have a plan. And what they're really aiming to do is to eliminate that protection by virtue of their lawsuit before the Supreme Court.
Do you believe, as the scientific community has concluded, that man-made climate change has made wildfires bigger, hotter, and more deadly, and have made hurricanes wetter, slower, and more damaging?
Well, first, I'm very proud of our record on the environment and on conservation. According to all of the best estimates, our air and land are cleaner than any time ever recorded. Our water is among the cleanest in the world. And just a little while ago, the President signed the Outdoors Act. It's the largest investment in our public lands and public parks in 100 years. Now, with regard to climate change, the climate is changing. But the issue is, what's the cause and what do we do about it? President Trump has made it clear that we're going to continue to listen to the science.
That's a big whopper. President Trump has steadfastly maintained his denial of climate science. He denies the existence of climate change. He seems to be speaking about an administration which might be desirable, but one that does not reflect the reality of the administration's actions and practices and positions.
Senator Harris, as the Vice President mentioned, you co-sponsored the Green New Deal in Congress. But Vice President Biden said in last week's debate that he does not support the Green New Deal. But if you look at the Biden-Harris campaign website, it describes the Green New Deal as a crucial framework. What exactly would be the stance of a Biden-Harris administration toward the Green New Deal?
Joe Biden will not ban fracking. That is a fact. I served, when I first got to the Senate, on the committee that's responsible for the environment. Do you know this administration took the word science off the website and then took the phrase climate change off the website? Donald Trump, when asked about the wildfires in California, and the question was, you know, the science is telling us this, you know what Donald Trump said? Science doesn't know. Joe is about saying we're going to invest that in renewable energy. It's going to be about the creation of millions of jobs. We will achieve net zero emissions by 2050, carbon neutral by 2035. Joe has a plan. We will also re-enter the climate agreement with pride.
You were the first Senate co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. And while Joe Biden denied the Green New Deal, Susan, thank you for pointing out, the Green New Deal is on their campaign website. And as USA Today said, it's essentially the same plan.
It's another misleading statement by Vice President Pence. What appears on the Biden website is an agreement that the Green New Deal provides a framework for proceeding, but Biden does not embrace all aspects of the Green New Deal. He has his own ideas about how to proceed to protect the environment. So it's a classic effort of Pence to distort the record of his opponent. It's a really tough issue. Fracking is an issue that poses a wedge between more moderate Democrats such as Vice President Biden and more progressive candidates and office holders such as AOC. The reality is that fracking cannot continue forever. We've got to convert fully to clean energy, and that is what Joe Biden intends to do. The question is what steps have to be taken and can be taken before we can convert fully to green energy, clean energy. That's really the difference between Biden and AOC at this point.
The vice president earlier referred to, as part of what he thinks is an accomplishment, the president's trade war with China. You lost that trade war. You lost it. What ended up happening is because of a so-called trade war with China, America lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs. Farmers have experienced bankruptcy because of it. We are in a manufacturing recession because of it.
Lost the trade war with China. Joe Biden never fought it. Joe Biden has been a cheerleader for communist China over the last several decades.
Trump and Pence continually misunderstand the impact of the tariffs imposed by President Trump. Trump likes to think that's a cost imposed on China. The losers in the deal are American consumers. The reality is that when tariffs are applied, that hurts American purchasers and American consumers. And I think that Trump continually distorts that point, perhaps because he thinks his supporters don't understand that point. His supporters might just think they are imposing greater charges on China, and the result is, in fact, greater costs for the American consumers.
China is to blame for the coronavirus. China and the World Health Organization did not play straight with the American people. They did not let our personnel into China to get information on the coronavirus until the middle of February.
You know, that's misleading. We know two facts: that when President Trump was first briefed about coronavirus in January by the intelligence agencies, he sat on it for 6 weeks, didn't do anything. Fact number two, he refused to send American scientists to China. So from the very beginning, not only did President Trump downplay the coronavirus, but he engaged in actions that really hurt the United States, inflicted more harm on Americans, and we undoubtedly would not have lost nearly as many people as we have if, in fact, President Trump had acted on that intelligence right away.
What is your definition of the role of American leadership in 2020?
America's intelligence community told us Russia interfered in the election of the President of the United States in 2016 and is playing in 2020. Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, said the same. But Donald Trump, the commander-in-chief of the United States of America, prefers to take the word of Vladimir Putin over the word of the American intelligence community. You can look at the Iran nuclear deal, which now has put us in a position where we are less safe because they are building up what might end up being a significant nuclear arsenal. We were in that deal, guys. We were in the Iran nuclear deal with friends, with allies around the country.
Well, President Trump kept his word when we moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, the capital of the state of Israel. When Joe Biden was vice president, they promised to do that, and they never did. We've stood strong with our allies, but we've been demanding. NATO is now contributing more to our common defense than ever before, thanks to President Trump's leadership. We've strengthened our alliances across the Asia-Pacific. Our armed forces destroyed the ISIS caliphate and took down their leader, al-Baghdadi, without one American casualty. But notably, America's hearts today are with the family of Kayla Mueller. Today, 2 of the ISIS killers responsible for Kayla Mueller's murder were brought to justice in the United States. When Joe Biden was vice president, we had an opportunity to save Kayla Mueller. It breaks my heart to reflect on it, but the military came into the Oval Office, presented a plan. They said they knew where Kayla was. Baghdadi had held her for 18 months, abused her mercilessly before they killed her. But when Joe Biden was vice president, they hesitated for a month. And when armed forces finally went in, it was clear she'd been moved 2 days earlier. And her family says with a heart that broke the heart of every American that if President Donald Trump had been president, they believe Kayla would be alive today.
To the Mueller family, I know about your daughter's case, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What happened to her is awful, and it should have never happened. And I know Joe feels the same way. And I know that President Obama feels the same way. After the strike on Soleimani, there was a counter strike on our troops in Iraq. And they suffered serious brain injuries. And do you know what Donald Trump dismissed them as? Headaches. And this is about a pattern of Donald Trump's, where he has referred to our men who are serving in our military as suckers and losers. Donald Trump, who went to Arlington Cemetery and stood above the graves of our fallen heroes and said, what's in it for them? Because, of course, you know, he only thinks about what's in it for him.
Thank you.
Joe Biden would, but Joe Biden would hold Russia to account for any threat to our nation's security or to our troops who are sacrificing their lives for the sake of our democracy and our safety.
Thank you, Senator Harris. This is such an important issue, but
that reflects a very striking difference between the Biden and Trump tickets. Biden has been in the past very tough on Putin, and Donald Trump has been very soft, cuddling up to Putin. And Vice President Pence does not have a good response to the strong charges made by Kamala Harris. He can't answer that question, so he chooses to evade it.
we have other important issues as well, and
Susan,
I want to make sure we have a chance
I really
to
have
talk
to respond to that.
I'm,
Look, she has
15 seconds because
Well, I gotta
we're
have
trying
more
to
than
keep.
that. Look.
Well, I'm sorry, but Vice President
Look,
Pence, you've had more time.
I feel sorry for the moderator, Susan Page. She's doing her best to contain Vice President Pence, but he insists on speaking over her, just as he insisted on speaking over Kamala Harris. And so it's made the job of moderating this debate very, very difficult. But I think thus far she's doing a pretty good job.
President Donald Trump not only respects but reveres all of those who serve in our armed forces, and any suggestion otherwise is ridiculous.
Thank you, Vice President Pence.
The American people deserve, Susan, the American people deserve to know.
Vice President Pence, I did not, excuse me,
Susan, the
I did
American
not
people
create
deserve
the
to know
rules for tonight.
Joe Biden
Your
and Trump-
campaigns agreed to the rules for tonight's debate with the Commission on Presidential Debates. I'm here to enforce them.
In the first presidential debate, Donald Trump continually violated the rules that he had agreed to, indicating to American viewers that I think Trump and Pence aren't interested in following the rules of the debate. any more than they're interested in adhering to constitutional provisions and statutes that have been flagrantly violated by President Trump.
You've refused to answer the question. Joe Biden has refused to answer the question. So I think the American people would really like to know, if Judge Amy Coney Barrett is confirmed to the Supreme Court of the United States, are you and Joe Biden, if somehow you win this election, going to pack the Supreme Court to get your way?
I'm so glad we went through a little history lesson. Let's do that a little more. In 1864...
Well, I'd like you to answer the question.
No, Mr. Vice President, I'm
Please,
speaking.
for a
I'm
chance.
speaking. Okay. In 1864, Abraham Lincoln was up for re-election. And it was 27 days before the election. And a seat became open on the United States Supreme Court. Abraham Lincoln's party was in charge not only of the White House, but the Senate. But Honest Abe said it's not the right thing to do. The American people deserve to make the decision about who will be the next president of the United States. And then that person can select who will serve for a lifetime on the highest court of our land.
Thank you, Senator Harris.
People, Susan, are voting right now. They'd like to know if you and Joe Biden are going to pack the Supreme Court if you don't get your way in this nomination.
Let's talk about packing.
You once again gave a non-answer. Joe Biden gave a non-answer.
Trying to answer you now.
The American people deserve a straight answer. And if you haven't figured it out yet, the straight answer is they are going to pack the Supreme Court.
This is a fascinating point. Donald Trump tried to score points against Joe Biden in their presidential debate on this issue. And of course, Pence is trying to do the same. But Americans should understand that there's nothing unconstitutional or illegal for Congress to change the number of seats on the Supreme Court. In fact, across the course of 200 years, we have changed that number 6 times. The size of the court has changed from the beginning until 1869, when we seem to have settled on the number of 9 justices. But there's nothing constitutionally to prohibit Congress from increasing the size of the court. So when Trump and Pence are pressing Biden and Harris to declare whether they'll pack the court, they're trying to create a non-issue. Here's why. What Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell have done since Trump assumed office, and even before Trump assumed office, is to pack the court, fill it with far right-wing conservatives. After all, Americans do have a good memory about the fact that Senate Leader Mitch McConnell refused to hold a nomination hearing for President Obama's nomination of Judge Merrick Garland, even though Obama still had 11 months to go in his final term in office. And McConnell said, we're simply not going to hold a hearing. Thus, he was holding the seat open on the hope that the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, would win, and therefore he could pack the court with conservatives. So everybody understands that both parties historically are trying to place men and women on the court who will be warmer to their views, their platform. But the reality is it's very hard to predict what justices will do when they hear issues. I think that both Biden and Harris have tried to evade that question because they don't want to provide campaign fodder to Trump and Pence to create an advertising campaign that they could use by saying, see, if they're elected, they're going to pack the court with liberal justices who will uphold Roe versus Wade, which would be a means of raising a lot of revenue. Republicans have raised zillions of dollars with the threat that Roe versus Wade would be continued by liberal justices. So I think it's to avoid providing further ammunition for the Republicans. But after all, they don't need to make that determination now. They can make that determination if and when they assume office.
Do you know that of the 50 people who President Trump appointed to the Court of Appeals for lifetime appointments, not one is black? This is what they've been doing. You want to talk about packing a court? Let's have that discussion.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Senator. Let's go on and talk about the issue of racial justice.
I just want the record to reflect she never answered the question.
Senator Harris, in the
When Pence makes the point that Harris didn't answer that question, she could equally say that Pence didn't answer the question about how the administration is going to protect Americans against denial of coverage for pre-existing conditions. And she could also say to Pence, you didn't answer the question of whether or not you would ban all abortions. It's not uncommon in the history of both presidential and vice presidential debates for candidates to evade some questions that they fear an answer would be deeply wounding.
case of Breonna Taylor, was justice done? You have 2 minutes.
I don't believe so. And I've talked with Breonna's mother, Tamika Palmer, and her family. And her family deserves justice. She was a beautiful young woman. She had as her life goal to become a nurse, and she wanted to become an EMT to first learn what's going on out on the street so she could then become a nurse and save lives. And her life was taken unjustifiably and tragically and violently. And it brings me to, the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that America witnessed, during which an American man was tortured and killed under the knee of an armed, uniformed police officer. I believe strongly that, first of all, we are never going to condone violence, but we always must fight for the values that we hold dear, including the fight to achieve our ideals. We need reform of our policing in America and our criminal justice system, which is why Joe and I will immediately ban chokeholds and carotid holds. George Floyd would be alive today if we did that. We will require a national registry for police officers who break the law. We will, on the issue of criminal justice reform, get rid of private prisons and cash bail, and we will decriminalize marijuana, and we will expunge the records of those who have been convicted of marijuana. This is the time for leadership on a tragic issue of unarmed Black people in America who have been killed.
Thank you, Senator Harris. Vice President Pence, let me pose the same question to you. In the case of Breonna Taylor, was justice done? You have 2 minutes, uninterrupted.
Well, our heart breaks for the loss of any innocent American life. And the family of Breonna Taylor has our sympathies. But I trust our justice system, a grand jury that refused the evidence. And it really is remarkable that as a former prosecutor, you would assume that an impaneled grand jury looking at all the evidence got it wrong. And with regard to George Floyd, there's no excuse for what happened to George Floyd. And justice will be served. But there's also no excuse for the rioting and looting that followed. I mean, it really is astonishing. Flora Westbrook is with us here tonight in Salt Lake City. Just a few weeks ago, I stood at what used to be her salon. It was burned to the ground by rioters and looters. And Flora is still trying to put her life back together. And I must tell you, this presumption that you hear consistently from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that America is systemically racist, and that, as Joe Biden said, that he believes that law enforcement has an implicit bias against minorities, is a great insult to the men and women who serve in law enforcement. And I want everyone to know who puts on the uniform of law enforcement every day that President Trump and I stand with you. And it is remarkable that when Senator Tim Scott tried to pass a police reform bill, brought together a group of Republicans and Democrats, Senator Harris, you got up and walked out of the room. And then you filibustered Senator Tim Scott's bill on the Senate floor that would have provided new accountability, new resources. But we don't have to choose between supporting law enforcement, improving public safety, and supporting our African-American neighbors and all of our minorities.
Pence, like Donald Trump, is unwilling to acknowledge the systemic racism in America and has thrown down all of his weight behind law enforcement, does not want to criticize law enforcement across the country and does deny institutional racism within police departments. Here, he is denying what most people will consider a fact, and indeed 70% of the American people will say that there is bias within police departments, as recent polls indicate. And I see the fly has landed on Pence's head. Probably it can't escape all of the hairspray.
I will not sit here and be lectured by the Vice President on what it means to enforce the laws of our country. I am the only one on this stage who has personally prosecuted everything from child sexual assault to homicide. I'm the only one on this stage who has prosecuted the big banks for taking advantage of America's homeowners. I'm the only one on this stage who prosecuted for-profit colleges for taking advantage of our veterans. And the reality of this is that we are talking about an election in 27 days, where last week the President of the United States took a debate stage in front of 70 million Americans and refused to condemn white supremacists.
Not true.
And
not true.
It wasn't like he didn't have a chance. He didn't do it, and then he doubled down. And then he said, when pressed, stand back, stand by. And this is a part of a pattern of Donald Trump's. He called Mexicans rapists and criminals. He instituted as his first act a Muslim ban. On the issue of Charlottesville, where people were peacefully protesting the need for racial justice, where a young woman was killed. And on the other side, there were neo-Nazis carrying tiki torches, shouting racial epithets, anti-Semitic slurs. And Donald Trump, when asked about it, said there were fine people on both sides.
You know, I think this is one of the things that makes people dislike the media so much in this country, Susan, is that you selectively edit, just like Senator Harris did, comments that President Trump and I and others on our side of the aisle make. I mean, Senator Harris conveniently omitted, after the president made comments about people on either side of the debate over monuments, he condemned the KKK, neo-Nazis, and white supremacists, and has done so repeatedly. You're concerned that he doesn't condemn neo-Nazis. President Trump has Jewish grandchildren. His daughter and son-in-law are Jewish. This is a president who respects and cherishes all of the American people.
Vice President's comment that Donald Trump cherishes all Americans is betrayed by the facts. He has uttered numerous racist comments over the course of 4 years. His unwillingness, as Senator Harris pointed out, to denounce white supremacy on the occasion of his debate with Vice President Biden reflects the fact that he's uncomfortable in denouncing the far right wing in America and uncomfortable in denouncing white supremacists. And when he did say to the Proud Boys, stay back and be ready for what? That's the great concern.
Stand back, stand by.
Stand back, stand by. That terrible refrain, because to many that sounded like a code, a signal to be ready. And the reality is that so many of his comments reflect the dog whistle that he has blown over the course of 4 years to call into action right-wing racist groups.
I really need to make this point. When you were DA in San Francisco, when you left office, African Americans were 19 times more likely to be prosecuted for minor drug offenses than whites and Hispanics. When you were Attorney General of California, you increased the disproportionate incarceration of blacks in California. Yeah. You did nothing on criminal justice reform in California. You didn't lift a finger to pass the First Step Act on Capitol Hill. I mean, the reality is your record speaks for itself. President Trump and I have fought for criminal justice reform.
Thank you, Vice President
We fought for educational choice and opportunities for African Americans, all of our
Thank you, sir.
And we'll do it for 4 more years.
Thank you.
It's another good example of how Vice President Pence is not adhering to the rules to which he agreed. Susan Page, the moderator, is at pains to ask him to stop. By my count, he just exceeded his limit by a good 20, 25, 30 seconds, completely and repeatedly talked over her, despite her pleas for him to stop talking.
You know, there is no more important issue than the final issue that we're going to talk about tonight, and that is the issue of the election
But
itself.
Susan, he attacked my record. I would like an opportunity to respond.
Let me give you 30 seconds because we're running out of time.
I appreciate that. First of all, having served as the Attorney General of the state of California, the work that I did is a model of what our nation needs to do, and we will be able to do under a Joe Biden presidency. Our agenda includes what this administration has failed to do. It will be about not only instituting a ban on chokeholds and carotid holes.
Thank you.
Not only.
Thank you, Senator
I
Harris.
would like to go through.
These are points that you made earlier in the hour, and I want to talk about the election itself before we have to.
But I want to talk about the connection between what Joe and I will do and my record.
It's a tough moment for Senator Harris and the moderator, given the fact that Pence took more time than he was allocated. It places Susan Page, the moderator, in a tough spot to enforce the remaining time when, in fact, Senator Harris has been shortchanged, unable to exercise the time granted to her, and so it may look to the audience as though she's overstepping her bounds, when in reality she's just trying to reclaim time that's been taken from her by Vice President Pence.
Agents would wear body cameras and keep them on full time. We were the first to initiate a requirement that there would be a training for law enforcement on implicit bias because, yes, Joe Biden and I recognize that implicit bias does exist, Mr. Vice President, contrary to what you may believe. We did the work of instituting reforms that were about investing in reentry. This is the work that we have done and the work we will do going forward. And again, I will not be lectured by the Vice President on our record of what we have done in terms of law enforcement.
I like that phrase, I will not be lectured. I think Senator Harris has uttered that 2 or maybe 3 times. It's a powerful way to speak to a man who is attempting to round out her time and to speak over her, and who is engaged in condescension.
President Trump has several times refused to commit himself to a peaceful transfer of power after the election. If your ticket wins and President Trump refuses to accept a peaceful transfer of power, what steps would you and Vice President Biden then take? What would happen next?
So I'll tell you, Joe and I are, I think, particularly proud of the coalition that we've built around our campaign. We probably have one of the broadest coalitions of folks that you've ever seen in a presidential race. Of course, we have the support of Democrats, but also independents and Republicans. In fact, 7 members of President George W. Bush's cabinet are supporting our ticket. We have the support of Colin Powell, Cindy McCain, John Kasich, over 500 generals, retired generals, and former national security experts and advisors are supporting our campaign. And I believe they are doing that because they know that Joe Biden has a deep, deep-seated commitment to fight for our democracy and to fight for the integrity of our democracy and to bring integrity back to the White House. And so we believe in the American people. We believe in our democracy. And here's what I'd like to say to everybody. Vote. Please vote. Vote early. Come up with a plan to vote. Go to iwillvote.com. You can also go to joebiden.com. We have it within our power in these next 27 days to make the decision about what will be the course of our country for the next 4 years. And it is within our power, and if we use our vote and we use our voice, we will win. And we will not let anyone subvert our democracy with what Donald Trump has been doing, as he did on the debate stage last week, when again in front of 70 million people, he openly attempted to suppress the vote. Joe Biden, on the other hand, on that same debate stage, because clearly Donald Trump doesn't think he can run on a record because it's a failed record, Joe Biden on that stage said, hey, just please vote. So I'll repeat what Joe said. Please vote.
Well, Susan, first and foremost, I think we're going to win this election. Because while Joe Biden and Kamala Harris rattle off a long litany of the establishment in Washington, D.C., an establishment that Joe Biden's been a part of for 47 years, President Donald Trump has launched a movement of everyday Americans from every walk of life. And I have every confidence that those same Americans that delivered that historic victory in 2016, they see this president's record where we rebuild our military, we revived our economy through tax cuts and rolling back regulation, fighting for fair trade, unleashing American energy. We appointed conservatives to our federal courts at every level. And we stood with the men and women of law enforcement every single day. And I think that movement of Americans has only grown stronger in the last 4 years. But when you talk about accepting the outcome of the election, I must tell you, Senator, your party has spent the last 3.5 years trying to overturn the results of the last election. It's amazing. When Joe Biden was vice president of the United States, the FBI actually spied on President Trump and my campaign. I mean, there were documents released this week that the CIA actually made a referral to the FBI documenting that those allegations were coming from the Hillary Clinton campaign. And of course, we've all seen the avalanche, what you put the country through for the better part of 3 years until it was found that there was no obstruction, no collusion, case closed. And then, Senator Harris, you and your colleagues in the Congress tried to impeach the President of the United States over a phone call. And now Hillary Clinton has actually said to Joe Biden that in her words, under no circumstances should he concede the election. So let me just say, I think we're going to win this election. President Trump and I are fighting every day in courthouses to prevent Joe Biden and Kamala Harris from changing the rules and creating this universal mail-in voting that will create a massive opportunity for voter fraud. And we have a free and fair election. We know we're going to have confidence in it. And I believe in all my heart that President Donald Trump's going to be reelected for 4 more years.
You know,
It's deeply troubling that Vice President Pence wouldn't take the simple opportunity presented to him to say, of course, if he and Donald Trump lose the election, that they will participate in a peaceful transfer of power, just like every other president has for 200 years. The very fact that he would refuse to answer that question, as did President Trump in the debate with Joe Biden, is deeply worrisome. And that's what concerns Americans about the continuation of American democracy, because the transfer of power is a hallmark of American democracy. And thus far, the president and vice president have been unwilling to commit to that, which suggests then that they are all about betraying American democratic values and principles. Deeply troubling. It's what we hear in an authoritarian regime, not in a democratic regime.
We see Douglas Emhoff, who's the husband of Kamala Harris, wearing a mask. This is the only vice presidential debate. There are still 2 more presidential debates that are scheduled. Only a handful of people in the audience, as you can see, behind moderator Susan Page.
I think that what the message is that as President Trump has from the beginning, when he downplayed the seriousness of the virus, the lethality of it, that he is trying to tell Americans, you don't have to take the COVID crisis, the COVID virus so seriously. You don't have to let it control your lives. Go about your business, return to school, go back to work, fully open up the economy. And he does that for selfish reasons, because he believes that if Americans forget that we are suffering under a pandemic, that will help improve his re-election opportunities. The economic problems and the high number of deaths, I think, should be placed at the doorstep of Donald Trump. And I think that's a function of his own miscalculation in the early days of the COVID crisis.
What did you think about the overall demeanor of this debate compared to the presidential debate?
Well, this was much easier to watch. This was more pleasant to watch because we didn't have one candidate shouting over his opponent, shouting over the moderator, engaging in constant interruptions. There were still interruptions in this debate by Vice President Pence, and still occasions when he shouted over both his opponent and the moderator. But this was a lot easier to watch. I don't think that the debate swayed very many voters. There aren't many fence sitters any longer. And if anything, I think the debate probably served to fortify the support that each side enjoys. To the extent that Vice President Pence's decorum was better than President Trump's decorum, that probably pleased his supporters, but that alone was not going to lure more voters to the Trump-Pence ticket. I would give an edge to Senator Harris because of her more thorough answers, her willingness to address the facts, to promote the facts, as opposed to Vice President Pence, who was throughout the evening engaging in a lot of peddling of fiction. It's hard to say who wins a debate when the issues are so sharply drawn and the sides are so clearly marked out. But if anything, there was a stronger performance by Senator Harris. I'm David Adler. I'm president of the Alturas Institute. Thank you for watching this program. It's been a pleasure to spend some time with you exploring this very important, indeed historic vice presidential debate. I hope that you will subscribe to the Alturas Institute's YouTube channel. The Alturas Institute is committed to promoting American democracy by advancing the Constitution, civic education, gender equality, and equal protection of the law. We believe fervently in the mission of the Alturas Institute. I hope you'll find your way to joining us. Thanks again for watching.